Welcome to Credit and Coffee. This is a story about how a small investment taught me the true meaning of patience and contentment. It was late autumn of 2013, the air crisp and carrying the faint scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke, when I first heard the word Bitcoin truly register in my mind, not just as a fleeting news blurb, but as something tangible, something potentially within reach. I was sitting at my usual spot at the coffee shop near my building, the chipped ceramic mug warm in my hands, a faint ring of condensation already forming on the worn wooden table, the low hum of the espresso machine, a comforting backdrop to the rustle of newspapers and the quiet chatter of morning regulars. My friend, usually animated and full of grand, half-baked schemes, was unusually subdued that morning, talking about some obscure digital currency he'd stumbled upon, a concept that sounded like science fiction, but was somehow, he insisted, real. He'd shown me a small graph on his phone, a jagged line climbing slowly but steadily, and while I nodded, a part of me was already tuning out, accustomed to his latest fleeting obsessions, a different stock market tip each week, a new passive income stream he was convinced would make us millionaires overnight. He had a way of getting swept up in things, his enthusiasm infectious but often short-lived, leaving a trail of half-finished projects and discarded financial blueprints in his wake. I'd seen him dabble in penny stocks, lose a sizable sum in a speculative real estate venture that went south, and once even sink a good chunk of his savings into a multi-level marketing scheme selling obscure health supplements. Each time he'd emerge, slightly bruised but ever optimistic, ready for the next big thing. So when he started talking about digital gold and decentralized ledgers, my internal alarm bells, finely tuned by years of his wild swings, rang softly, a muted warning against another one of his intoxicating but ultimately unrealistic pursuits. But this one, for some reason, stuck. Perhaps it was the sheer unfamiliarity, the idea of something completely outside the traditional financial system I knew, a system that had always felt so opaque and unyielding to a regular guy like me, always just trying to keep my head above water amidst the rising tide of bills and the quiet anxiety of inflation that seemed to gnaw away at every paycheck. My pension, diligently contributed to each month, felt like a distant promise, shrouded in the complexities of actuarial tables and market fluctuations I barely understood. My small portfolio of mutual funds, managed by a faceless institution, delivered returns that were respectable but certainly not transformative, moving with the sluggish grace of a glacier. I wasn't wealthy, not by any stretch, living a comfortable but modest life, always conscious of the quiet pressure to save, to plan for the future, to avoid the lurking shadows of debt that seemed to ensnare so many around me. We had a good roof over our heads, a reliable car, and never worried about putting food on the table, but the future always felt like a precarious balancing act, requiring constant vigilance and careful budgeting. The rising cost of healthcare premiums was a constant worry, a looming threat that chipped away at our peace of mind, reminding us of the fragility of our financial stability. My job at the time was stable, unremarkable, a cog in a large machine, and while it paid the mortgage and kept food on the table, it offered little in the way of excitement or the kind of financial liberation I sometimes daydreamed about, especially when the quarterly statements from my traditional investments barely budged, plodding along with a predictability that was both reassuring and utterly uninspiring. I remembered sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, feeling the weight of routine settling into my bones, yearning for a little more breathing room, a touch more agency over our financial destiny. It wasn't about being rich, it was about easing the subtle, persistent hum of anxiety that underscored much of adult life. Later that evening, the idea still buzzing faintly in the back of my mind, I found myself on my old desktop computer, the fan whirring softly as I typed the word Bitcoin into the search bar. The screen filled with articles, forums, diagrams, a new language of cryptography and blockchain unfolding before my eyes. It felt like stepping into a dimly lit, labyrinthine library, each click opening a new door to a concept I barely grasped. I spent hours reading, the glowing light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses, the quiet hum of the machine a hypnotic accompaniment to my deep dive into this new digital frontier. I read about Satoshi Nakamoto, the enigmatic creator, and the radical vision of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The technical jargon was dense, but the underlying philosophy, the idea of financial autonomy free from centralized control, resonated with a quiet power. It felt almost rebellious, a grassroots movement against the monolithic structures of traditional banking. The price was low then, still in the hundreds, a digital curiosity rather than a global phenomenon. I remember reading about early adopters, almost legendary figures in this nascent world, who had bought thousands for pennies. Stories of pizzas bought with thousands of Bitcoin or forgotten hard drives containing fortunes felt like modern folklore, distant and fantastical. That wasn't my story, nor could it be. My finances were meticulously budgeted, every dollar accounted for, but there was a small, almost imperceptible sliver of discretionary income, usually reserved for an extra dinner out or a new gadget I didn't truly need. It was a sum I considered play money, something I could afford to lose without it impacting our household budget or our overall financial security. This small allowance for minor indulgences was a carefully guarded part of our financial plan, a tiny luxury in an otherwise disciplined approach. I pondered it for days, the thought a small pebble in my shoe, nagging at me, a low murmur of what if beneath the surface of my everyday life. I found myself thinking about it while commuting on the bus, the rhythmic sway of the vehicle a backdrop to my internal debate, wondering if this was just another fleeting fascination or something genuinely new. I considered the potential pitfalls, the inherent risks of something so new and unregulated. What if it was a scam? What if it simply vanished? The financial landscape was littered with the bones of failed innovations, grand promises that crumbled under their own weight. My instinct was always caution, a cautious approach born from years of watching others stumble. But there was also a glimmer of excitement, a rare spark of curiosity that felt different from my friends' usual fervent pronouncements. My wife, sensing my quiet distraction, asked me about it one evening while we were washing dishes, the warm water cascading over our hands, the familiar clinking of plates a comforting rhythm. The scent of dish soap and the lingering aroma of our dinner filled the kitchen, a domestic tableau of quiet routine. I explained haltingly about this digital money, trying to convey the vague excitement I felt, mixed with the inherent skepticism of someone raised to believe in tangible assets. I talked about the blockchain, the idea of scarcity, the potential for a new kind of financial freedom. She listened patiently, as she always did, her gentle nod a quiet anchor in my sometimes turbulent thoughts. Her gaze was steady, discerning, not dismissive, but always grounded in practicality. She understood my yearning for something more, but also shared my inherent caution. She knew our financial limitations and our responsibilities. We had built our life on a foundation of prudence, of measured risks, of prioritizing stability above all else. When I finally decided to put in a small amount, a sum that felt significant enough to be an investment, but small enough not to cause real pain if it vanished, $320 to be exact, she simply smiled and said, "It's your money, my love. Just don't expect it to buy us a mansion." Her quiet support, devoid of judgment or grand expectations, was a gift in itself. It was the understanding that sometimes, a small leap of faith, a minor indulgence, could be a healthy thing, as long as it didn't jeopardize the steady ground beneath our feet. Her words echoed a deeper sentiment of trust and shared values, a calm acceptance that allowed me to explore this digital curiosity without feeling reckless or irresponsible. I used one of the few nascent exchanges available then, the interface clunky and unfamiliar, the process feeling akin to a secret handshake in a dimly lit back alley of the internet. It felt less like a sophisticated financial transaction and more like an experiment, a venture into uncharted territory. The security protocols were rudimentary by today's standards, a series of email confirmations and cryptic warnings. Typing in my banking details felt like a minor act of rebellion against the established order, a tiny toe dipped into a vast, unknown ocean. Clicking buy felt like a leap of faith into a digital void, a tiny whisper against the roar of the traditional financial world. The sensation was less about making a profit and more about participation, a quiet staking of a small claim in this new, bewildering landscape. The confirmation email was curt, just a few lines of text confirming my fractional ownership of this strange new asset. I saved it almost reverently in a separate folder on my desktop, alongside scanned copies of important documents and family photos, a small digital artifact of a curious decision. And then, life simply continued. The digital asset, a small string of code now residing somewhere in the vastness of the internet, faded from my immediate consciousness, a tiny seed planted in the hope it might one day sprout, but without any expectation of a miraculous harvest. I went back to my spreadsheets, my morning coffee, the predictable rhythms of my days. The immediate concerns of balancing our budget, ensuring our insurance policies were up to date, and making sure the car's maintenance was done, quickly recaptured my attention. The weight of our mortgage, a steadfast companion in our financial journey, demanded consistent attention, as did the quiet anxiety about future expenses for our aging parents. The subtle pressure of credit card bills, while always paid in full, served as a constant reminder of the delicate balance required to maintain our comfortable but modest lifestyle. We knew we had to be diligent, always, lest the comfortable ground give way beneath us. We talked about long-term goals, about contributing more to our retirement funds, about the possibility of investing in a small rental property one day, a more traditional form of passive income that felt safe and predictable, even if slow-growing. These were the real markers of our financial journey, the tangible goals we worked towards, not the ethereal promises of digital currency. The years that followed blurred into a tapestry of everyday moments, each thread woven with its own pattern of small joys and quiet anxieties. The Bitcoin purchase faded into the background, a forgotten digital relic, occasionally resurfacing in my memory like an old photograph found tucked away in a dusty drawer. It became a distant anecdote, a curiosity from a different time, like a childhood memory of a peculiar toy. My work continued its steady, uninspiring pace, the monthly reports piling up on my desk, the fluorescent lights humming above my cubicle a constant drone. The smell of stale coffee and printer ink became the aroma of my working life, a steady, unchanging scent. Each day felt like a small, incremental push forward, without grand victories or crushing defeats, just the relentless, quiet rhythm of routine. The anxiety of being house poor, even with a comfortable income, was a persistent shadow, the rising property taxes and the always looming mortgage payment, a reminder of how much of my earnings were spoken for before they even arrived. I recalled the careful calculations each month, the quiet discussion with my wife about where to trim a little, where we could afford a small treat. We'd forego a takeout meal to save for a repair, or choose to walk to save on gas, always mindful of the invisible lines that contained our financial freedom. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the washing machine, these mundane domestic sounds were comforting, but also reminders of the continuous expenses of simply living. I watched friends and colleagues, some with higher incomes, struggle with secret debt, the quiet strain visible in their eyes, the forced smiles masking a deeper worry. I saw the signs, the new car that felt just a little too expensive for their salary, the elaborate vacations that surely stretched their credit, the constant talk of chasing promotions and bonuses just to keep up. One friend, a colleague from a different department, confessed over a hurried lunch that he was barely making ends meet, trapped by an accumulation of credit card debt and a personal loan he took out to cover a previous financial misstep. His story was a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the slippery slope that financial pressures could become. I saw others leap into new ventures, some succeeding spectacularly, others collapsing with a heartbreaking thud, the startup dreams evaporating into thin air, leaving behind only the bitter taste of lost potential and financial ruin. A former classmate, full of entrepreneurial zeal, launched a tech startup with huge fanfare, mortgaging his home and convincing family to invest. For a brief period, he was the toast of our social circle, his name appearing in local business publications. Then, just as quickly, the venture capital dried up, the product failed to gain traction, and he was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a shattered dream. The quiet dignity with which he tried to rebuild his life was admirable, but the cost of that ambition was clear. My own friend, the one who first mentioned Bitcoin, eventually stumbled into the volatile world of altcoins, chasing meme coins and promising projects, his portfolio a dizzying roller coaster of gains and devastating losses, each swing deepening the lines around his eyes. He'd call me sometimes late at night, his voice a mix of manic excitement and desperate worry, detailing his latest sure thing or the crushing blow of a sudden market correction. He spoke of NFTs, of DeFi protocols, of staking and yield farming, a torrent of new jargon that washed over me, a confusing language of speculative finance. I listened, offering quiet, non-committal responses, remembering his earlier fleeting obsessions. He once excitedly told me about a new altcoin that promised to revolutionize supply chains, insisting it was the next big thing, the real future. He poured a significant portion of his emergency savings into it, brushing aside my cautious questions with fervent conviction. His initial gains were indeed impressive, inflating his confidence and drawing him deeper into the rabbit hole. He'd send me screenshots of his wallet, bragging about the multiplying digits, hinting that I should join him, chastising my old-fashioned approach to money. But just as quickly, the project's developers vanished, the liquidity was pulled, and the price plummeted to zero in what crypto enthusiasts called a rug pull. He eventually lost a significant portion of his savings in a rug pull scam, his one-sprite enthusiasm replaced by a quiet, lingering bitterness that poisoned our friendship for a time. a chasm of unspoken regret and bad advice hanging between us. The phone calls stopped, the coffee shop meetings grew awkward and infrequent, replaced by a strained silence whenever we did cross paths. The sight of his weary face, etched with worry and disappointment, was a potent image, a visceral warning against the intoxicating allure of easy money. I heard stories of others, eager to amplify their gains, who delved into crypto-leverage trading, only to watch their portfolios evaporate overnight during a market crash, their hopes and savings vanishing like smoke. One particularly vivid account involved a young couple who had leveraged their house to buy into the market, convinced that crypto was their ticket to early retirement. They lost everything in a flash crash, their dream home replaced by the cold reality of foreclosure, their future dissolving into despair. I knew a man whose marriage buckled under the stress of extreme market volatility, his wife unable to bear the constant anxiety, the secret investments, the late-night checking of charts, the relentless pursuit of an elusive fortune. The emotional toll was heavier than any financial loss, eroding the very foundation of their relationship until it finally fractured beyond repair. These stories, some anecdotal, some first-hand accounts that stung with their raw honesty, served as quiet, persistent warnings. They were whispers of caution in the increasing clamor of the digital gold rush, reminders of the human cost behind the flashing numbers and dizzying promises. I felt the pull, of course, the siren song of quick wealth, especially when the news cycles began to hum with the word cryptocurrency again, louder and more insistently this time. The headlines were everywhere, screaming about millionaires made overnight, about the future of finance, about a revolution. By 2017, Bitcoin's price had soared. My forgotten $320 was suddenly worth a few thousand, then tens of thousands. I remember logging into that old exchange, my heart thumping a strange, uneven rhythm against my ribs, the sheer disbelief washing over me like a cold wave. The faint scent of dust from my old keyboard, the familiar creak of my chair, grounded me slightly, but the numbers on the screen seemed unreal, a glitch in the matrix. I double-checked, then triple-checked, my fingers trembling slightly as I refreshed the page. The value held steadfast and astonishing. My wife, when I showed her, simply raised an eyebrow, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "I told you not to expect a mansion," she said, but her eyes held a spark of shared wonder. Her amusement was gentle, a recognition of the irony of our earlier conversation, but also a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected turn of events. We sat there together, looking at the glowing screen, the magnitude of the number slowly sinking in. It wasn't life-changing in the grand scheme of things, not enough to retire on, but it was certainly a significant sum, more than we earned in several months of diligent saving. The temptation to sell, to take the profit, was immense. I imagined all the things we could do: pay off the lingering student loans, finally replace the aging appliances in the kitchen, perhaps even take that dream trip we'd always talked about to the Scottish Highlands, feeling the wind whip across the ancient hills. The practical side of my brain buzzed with possibilities, envisioning the immediate relief that such a windfall could bring. The temptation to invest more, to chase the skyrocketing prices, to buy into the next big thing, was even stronger. My phone buzzed constantly with news alerts, friends sharing articles, everyone suddenly an expert on blockchain and digital assets. Social media feeds were saturated with stories of incredible gains, of people quitting their jobs to become full-time crypto traders. The FOMO, the fear of missing out, was a palpable force, a collective current pulling everyone into its wake. I saw people making rash decisions, pouring their life savings into what they hoped would be the next big wave, mortgaging their homes, taking out loans against their existing traditional investments. There were stories of people emptying their 401ks, sacrificing their long-term security for the immediate promise of hypergrowth. I saw the professional jealousy and financial comparison poison once solid friendships, people measuring their self-worth against the volatile market gains of others, a corrosive envy that gnawed at relationships. It was a dizzying, intoxicating period, a kind of collective mania, a modern-day gold rush fueled by internet hype and speculative frenzy. Every conversation seemed to circle back to crypto, to stories of fortunes made and fortunes waiting to be claimed. I felt the pressure from outside, from the pervasive narrative of easy wealth, and from within a quiet whisper of "what if I don't act now?" My friend, still reeling from his earlier losses, even called me, his voice strangely calm, asking if I was going to double down on my Bitcoin. He had learned his lesson, he said, and was now only looking at the blue chips of the crypto world. His attempt to draw me back into the chase, even with a more measured approach, still felt like a subtle lure towards a path I instinctively knew was not for me. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the memory of my friend's sunken eyes after his rug pull, the bitter taste of his financial ruin lingering in my mind. Or the quiet, steady rhythm of my own life, the comfort of our small apartment, the familiar scent of our morning coffee brewing, the sound of rain drumming softly against the window panes on a quiet Sunday afternoon as I read a book. These were the anchors, the small joys that tethered me to a reality far more enduring than speculative investments. I remembered the feeling of that initial small purchase, a quiet experiment, not a desperate gamble. It had been a choice born out of curiosity, not avarice. The intention behind it had been light, unburdened by the crushing weight of expectation. I had treated it as found money, a small adventure into the unknown, and I realized that to change that intention now, to chase the accelerating gains with greedy abandon, would be to betray the very spirit of that initial, innocent leap. I chose to do nothing. I watched the market surge, then, inevitably, crash. The glorious bull run of 2017 dissolved into the long, bleak crypto winter of 2018. My thousands dwindled, then plummeted, back down to a few thousand, then even less. The news articles turned from euphoric celebrations to dire warnings, stories of despair and financial ruin. The silence from my previously enthusiastic friends was deafening, the celebratory posts replaced by an eerie quiet. The once vibrant online forums became ghost towns, populated only by the lamentations of those who had lost everything. A quiet sense of relief washed over me. I hadn't chased the highs, I hadn't succumbed to the pressure. I hadn't risked our stability for the promise of a moonshot. My original $320 investment, even at its lowest point after the crash, was still worth more than I paid for it, a small, stubborn testament to patience. It was a tangible vindication of my quiet restraint, a confirmation of the value of doing nothing when everyone else was doing something. I learned a profound lesson about risk management then, not from a textbook, but from the visceral experience of watching an asset's value fluctuate wildly while my own actions remained still. I realized that the true cost of chasing extreme gains wasn't just financial, it was emotional. The stress, the anxiety, the constant checking, the loss of sleep, the gnawing fear of missing out, or worse, losing everything, these were prices I wasn't willing to pay. The peace of mind that came from detachment, from not being emotionally tethered to every market swing, was far more valuable than any fleeting financial gain. My wife and I continued our quiet life, finding joy in simple moments. A perfectly brewed cup of tea in the morning, the warmth of her hand in mine during an evening stroll as the evening light softened the edges of the neighborhood, the comforting weight of a well-loved book in my lap by the window. These were the true riches, the steady, unquantifiable currency of a well-lived life. We focused on paying down our mortgage steadily, on building a secure emergency fund, on making small improvements to our home, painting the living room a new shade of soft gray that caught the morning light beautifully, repairing the creaky floorboards in the hallway that had annoyed us for years, planting a small herb garden on the patio. These were tangible, immediate satisfactions, far more grounding than the phantom promise of digital wealth. Each small home project, each debt paid down, each incremental addition to our savings felt like a real victory, a quiet assertion of control over our own lives. There were still financial pressures, of course. The burden of student loans from my younger days still lingered, a dull ache in the background of my budget, a testament to decisions made long ago. The constant anxiety of inflation and rising costs meant that every trip to the supermarket required more careful planning, more conscious choices, scrutinizing unit prices, opting for generic brands where possible, always with a mental tally running in my head. We were approaching the age of the sandwich generation, beginning to think about how we might support my aging mother while still planning for our own retirement, a future that loomed with its own set of responsibilities and financial complexities. We talked about long-term care insurance, about updating wills, about the myriad of considerations that come with aging and responsibility. These were real-world concerns, not theoretical market movements, and they reinforced my quiet resolve to seek stability over fleeting riches. I saw friends trapped in golden handcuffs, high salaries keeping them in soul-crushing jobs they despised, unable to leave because of the lifestyle their income now demanded, the psychological weight of that gilded cage slowly eroding their spirit. They spoke of burnout, of sleepless nights, of a pervasive dissatisfaction despite their material wealth. The glint of their expensive watches and the keys to their luxury cars seemed to mock the emptiness in their eyes. I made a midlife career change, moving from my large impersonal corporation to a smaller, more values-driven organization, taking a slight pay cut but gaining immeasurable peace of mind and a sense of purpose. The fluorescent hum of the old office was replaced by the quieter, more collaborative atmosphere of the new one, the impersonal corporate culture exchanged for a sense of belonging. This shift, made possible by our overall financial prudence and the absence of reckless investments, felt like a true liberation, a quiet reclamation of my time and my spirit, a decision that prioritized well-being over ever-increasing income. It was a trade-off I had carefully considered, and one I never regretted, as the intangible benefits far outweighed the slight reduction in my paycheck. The ability to look forward to Mondays, to feel genuinely engaged in my work, to contribute to something I believed in, was a wealth far greater than any digital fortune. We started a small emergency fund specifically for unexpected medical expenses for my mother, a practical and loving step that provided a profound sense of security. We looked into different retirement investment vehicles, consulting with a financial advisor who shared our conservative approach, focusing on long-term growth and stability rather than high-risk, high-reward gambles. Our budget became a living document, constantly reviewed and adjusted, reflecting our evolving priorities and concerns, a testament to our ongoing commitment to financial health. The gentle rhythm of our evenings, spent discussing these matters over a simple dinner or a cup of herbal tea, solidified our partnership, our shared vision for a secure and meaningful future. The quiet discipline of our approach, born from years of small, steady choices, had created a resilience that no market boom or bust could truly shake. Years continued to roll by, like smooth, worn river stones tumbling over one another. Each year brought its own subtle changes, a new wrinkle around my wife's eyes, a slightly deeper creak in my knees after a long walk, the gentle fading of paint on the exterior of our home under the relentless sun and rain. The crypto market, as it always did, eventually found its footing and began its slow, often erratic ascent again. It was no longer the sole topic of conversation, having settled into a more normalized, albeit still volatile, niche within the broader financial landscape. I still had that tiny fragment of Bitcoin, a forgotten bookmark in the vast ocean of the internet, a digital echo of a bygone curiosity. I'd occasionally check in on it, more out of a quiet curiosity than any fervent hope, usually prompted by a news article or a passing mention from a friend who was still following the space. Each time the numbers were a little higher, creeping upwards, a testament to the passage of time and the slow, inexorable march of technological adoption. The world had changed around it, embracing digital payments and online transactions more fully, and Bitcoin, despite its wild swings, had proven its staying power, emerging from the speculative shadows into a more established, if still niche, role. I would glance at the updated value, nod quietly to myself, and then close the tab, returning to the immediate, tangible realities of my day. There was no thrill, no surge of excitement, just a calm acknowledgement of its quiet resurgence. One quiet Tuesday morning, the gentle glow of dawn filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across our bedroom floor, I decided to check it one last time, just for the sake of it. The air was cool against my skin as I sat up, the sheets rustling softly. My wife was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft, and even the scent of her hair, faintly of lavender from her shampoo, a comforting presence. The house was still, save for the distant rumble of the city waking up, the murmur of traffic slowly building on the main road, the chirping of a lone bird outside our window. I navigated to the old exchange, the interface now updated and cleaner, more intuitive than the clunky, almost clandestine portal it once was, but still recognizable. It felt like revisiting an old, renovated building, familiar but somehow new. I logged in, a small flutter of anticipation, not of greed, but of quiet curiosity in my chest. And there it was. Not a mansion, not a private jet, not the kind of life-changing fortune that dominates headlines and fuels late-night dreams. Not enough to completely wipe away every financial concern or to guarantee a lavish retirement. But there it was, $18,750. From $320 bought almost a decade ago, mostly forgotten, untouched by greed or panic, weathering the storms of market crashes and the whispers of temptation. It was a number that represented not just a financial gain, but a culmination of years of quiet adherence to a principle. It wasn't the sum itself that filled me with such profound, quiet satisfaction. It was what it represented. It was the proof of patience, the quiet affirmation of restraint, the silent victory of choosing peace over the tumultuous chase. I sat there for a long time, the empty coffee cup cold on the bedside table, just watching the numbers, feeling a deep sense of contentment settle over me like a warm blanket. The faint scent of her perfume on the pillow next to me, the soft light of the rising sun, the familiar silence of our shared space, all these elements converged, amplifying the quiet joy of the moment. The money was a gift, yes, a welcome boon for a new home improvement project we'd been dreaming about, perhaps finally renovating that cramped old kitchen, tearing down the wall to the dining room, giving us more space, more light, more joy in our everyday cooking together, the scent of freshly baked bread filling a brighter, more open area. Or maybe it would be a substantial boost to our retirement savings, a small cushion against the anxieties of the future, a solid contribution to our long-term financial security, easing the burden of future uncertainties. We could bolster our insurance coverage, knowing we were even better prepared for whatever life might throw our way. But the real gift, the one that lingered long after the initial surprise faded, was the lesson. It was the understanding that true value isn't always found in the grand gestures or the dizzying highs, in the speculative frenzy of the stock market or the allure of fast-paced crypto trading, but in the quiet discipline, the steady hand, the willingness to let things unfold naturally. It was the realization that chasing endless wealth often leads to endless anxiety, a relentless pursuit that depletes the spirit, while cultivating contentment with what you have, even the small gains, brings a far richer reward. My life wasn't a story of overnight riches or spectacular losses. It was a story of quiet persistence, of weathering the storms, of finding joy in the everyday, and of learning to be grateful for the gentle, steady currents that carry us forward. As the sun fully rose, painting the walls of our apartment with a warm, golden light, I quietly closed the laptop, a faint smile on my face. The world outside was still rushing, still chasing, still striving, but in our small corner, in the quiet heart of our home, there was a profound and peaceful sense of enough. How has a moment of quiet patience or a decision to step back from the rush unexpectedly enriched your own life, perhaps in ways far beyond what money could buy? Share your story and reflections in the comments below. If this quiet journey resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and consider subscribing for more stories about finding contentment in life's steady rhythms. Also, I'm curious, what's one small, simple pleasure that brought you joy this past week?